What's up, y'all? I'm Julio Martinez, and we're back on another one today. We're going to be talking about the Brooklyn Nets, Bradley Beal, and whether or not it'd be a smart move for the team to acquire the All-Star guard via trade this offseason. This topic has been somewhat divisive amongst the NBA community recently, but not to worry, I have your answers. Episode 4 of Set the Record Straight, starting now. Going into the season, I firmly believe that once KD came back, and assuming that he did so and got back to his full normal self, I firmly believe that the Brooklyn Nets and the LA Clippers had the best, deepest, and most dangerous rosters in the NBA. It's why, even though Kyrie Irving is my favorite player in the NBA and think he receives more backlash than he deserves on other topics, I nonetheless believe that he received his appropriate criticism when he insinuated that the Nets did not have enough to compete and needed more pieces to do so. I mean, it really stunned me when he made those statements, because when you look at their roster, you have Kyrie Irving, a top 3 point guard in the NBA and a guy who's lethal in big games. You got KD, arguably the best player in the world when he's healthy. You have Spencer Dinwiddie, a selfless, mature, high IQ third wheel who has no problem dropping 30 in a game or being more of a distributor of the ball, as he played a lot of point guard in high school and college. And not to mention, you got a guy in Karis LeVert who's an excellent off-the-bench, get-a-bucket type guy who's had several spectacular and explosive performances. To think that he's your 4th scoring option is intimidating for their opponents. You got Joe Harris, a 3-point contest champion who's a top 3 catch-and-shoot shooter in the NBA. Jarrett Allen, an excellent rim protector, a solid rebounder, a high-energy player who demands no touches and usually gets his on lobs. Which brings me to the next player, Deandre Jordan, another guy who carries a lot of those same attributes. You got Garrett Temple, a guy who can really shoot the ball and defend on the perimeter. You got Taurean Prince, a high-energy wing who's also a solid bench player in his own respect. And it's funny because I can keep naming names. It's not like the Nets are a top-heavy team with KD and Kyrie and no one else to show for it. No, the Nets are a top-heavy team with KD and Kyrie with the plethora of players who not only complement them nicely, complement their stars, but also perform at a level that's better, much better at that, than the average NBA role player. Not only is this a deep bench and an overall great roster, but they're multifaceted. You got guys who can defend, guys who can shoot the ball at a very high level, guys who can score at all 3 levels. You got 2 big men who protect the rim very nicely, and a veteran experienced squad who isn't too old. I mean, what more could you want, Kyrie? Because of this, my initial thoughts were that, even though I love KD, love Kyrie, and love Bradley Beal individually as talents, I thought maybe because that they'd shown to be so ball dominant in their playing career that they'd get in each other's way and wouldn't mesh well. And not only was the fit questionable to me, but I was hesitant on what it would take to acquire a player like Bradley Beal. What would they have to do? They would have to deplete their bench because they'd have to give up so many players just to get back one player in Bradley Beal. And that's dangerous territory because you're eliminating a lot of the versatility and diversity you have as a team. The more I thought about it, though, the more I realized that I had it all twisted. I changed my mind for 2 main reasons. The first is that the Nets would be protected against injury in case one of the 3 stars got hurt. You'd still have 2 amazing all-stars with still potentially a solid bench, because it's not like you can't build your bench out in an effective way with veteran minimums, exceptions, and any money left over. The Lakers are a good example of that, building their bench out last minute with limited resources. Therefore, if the Nets equip themselves with 3 stars, they can sustain an injury to one of their stars and still remain competitive. In the other scenario, with only 2 stars, KD and Kyrie, if one of those guys got hurt, there's no way they could be able to contend and be competitive. I don't care how deep your bench is. If one of those guys, KD or Kyrie, got hurt, there's just no feasible way for that to happen. And obviously, when you're talking about KD and Kyrie, it'd be smart to be cautious of their health sustainability. Safeguarding against injury must be considered. Let's move on to the second reason, which is talent and fit. This comes from a guy who kind of thinks chemistry is a tad bit overrated. It's important, don't get me wrong, it's important. but I still think it's slightly overrated. Let's take the Warriors, for example. Do you guys recall when all these stats guys were suggesting that the Warriors flow better, score more, and are more efficient without KD on the floor? But the eyeball test alone would tell you that, like, no, don't be dumb. They're not better without him. I don't care what style he plays or what the numbers tell you. He makes them unbeatable. The talent that the Nets would have would be so insane and so overwhelming that the question actually becomes, would fit even matter at that point? And that's not to say that fit or the chemistry would be bad on the floor, because the more I actually got thinking about that too, the more I actually liked it. I actually envision it working very nicely. KD has some experience playing more off the ball than he's accustomed to after 3 years with the Warriors, and Bradley Beal's used to playing with a ball-dominant point guard in John Wall, not to mention that he can be a lethal off the ball catch and shoot shooter from beyond the arc. He's a career 38% from the three-point line. In simplest terms, Bradley Beal is just a souped-up Spencer Dinwiddie. He averaged 30 points per game this year, leading the Washington Wizards. But his focus and maturity leads me to believe that he'll have no issue or ill will if he's subjected to just 20 points per game. And not to mention the fact that I also think keeping him away from the Miami Heat, Philadelphia 76ers, and any other team of interest within the Eastern Conference, that's an attraction within itself. And a side note, for anyone that tells you that this trade isn't realistic, I'm here to tell you that there's no one team that can offer something night and day better than the Nets. In fact, I'd argue that many of the offers that would come from interested teams would be a weaker package. So the final verdict is yes, unequivocally, yes. Of course the Nets should trade for Bradley Beal. Don't overthink this one. And that's how you set the record straight.